When a teenage girl was slain in her friend's apartment, the cops put the pieces together and called it a robbery gone wrong. But as time went on, this theory was starting to seem more and more unrealistic. How did a group of masked men break into an apartment and knock out just one girl when there were 2 other people in there with her? Vanessa, or Honey Malone, was an 18-year-old girl who lived with her mom Flora in Stone Mountain, Georgia. On October 23, 2012, Honey arrived home after working her shift at a clothing store. Honey said she was pretty tired from her day at work, but was still planning to go hang out with some friends. Flora later mentioned that Honey would go out with friends pretty frequently, but this time in particular was strange because Honey seemed extremely exhausted. Regardless, Honey left home and started walking over to her friend's apartment, which was about a 5-minute walk. After her daughter left, Flora heard some fireworks-sounding noises coming from a nearby complex, and in true concerned mom fashion, she decided to call and check in on Honey just to make sure she was safe. Honey didn't answer. At first, Flora tried to brush it off. Sometimes Honey would turn off her phone, so maybe that's what happened. Flora then called her older daughter and Honey's sister, Cassandra, to check in on her. Cassandra answered and tried to reassure her mother that Honey was probably okay, she just must be preoccupied. But then Flora heard sirens in the area and made the decision to call Honey again. Still no answer. That's when Flora started to panic. Not long after that, there was a knock on the door. Flora opened it to find 2 men standing there. Kevin, Honey's ex-boyfriend, and his friend Chris. They were there to tell Flora that something had happened to Honey. After Kevin and Chris broke the news to Flora, she called Cassandra again. This was around 11:30 p.m. Cassandra picked up the phone to hear the sound of her mother bawling hysterically. She was informed that Honey had been fired at. Cassandra then rushed over to the Hampton Apartments to meet her mother. That was the complex where the crime took place, right behind Flora and Honey's building. When they first arrived, the police wouldn't tell the women anything. They hadn't positively identified Honey, and Flora was spitting off all of the many identifying marks on her daughter, such as the tattoo on her right hand. Even still, the police wouldn't confirm or deny if the victim was Honey. I'm not sure what the holdup was here. Flora was already told what happened to her daughter, so she already knew. Why were the cops withholding that information from the mom? Well, the officers finally confirmed that the victim was Honey, but that wasn't until 2:15 in the morning. Once the ID was made, detectives focused on the crime scene investigation. What happened and who was responsible? Cops spoke with friends, family, and neighbors to try and get down to the bottom of it all. The 2 friends who lived in the apartment Honey was slain in said a group of 3 to 6 masked men wearing all black broke into their apartment with Glocks. They said the men kicked down the door, tied up the 2 people who were inside, and shoved them in the bathroom. Apparently, the men used a shoelace and extension cord to tie up their victims. They also forced them into the bathtub. But at the time, Honey wasn't there yet. While the men were going through and stealing things from the apartment, detectives theorized that Honey came in thinking she was going to catch up with her pals. Instead, she was greeted by a bunch of masked and armed men who were probably caught off guard by her entrance. It's believed that Honey tried to run away once she realized what was going on, but before she could clear the thieves' view, they hit her with a bullet in the back. Honey's friends said they heard the sounds of the weapon firing and a girl screaming while they were restrained in the bathroom. Once Honey was knocked down with the first bullet, the group of men then fired at her again, this time in the chest. Then they allegedly brought her to one of the bedrooms where they shoved her in the closet face down on a pile of clothes. After that, the bad guys ran away, and once the 2 friends didn't hear any more commotion, they were able to untie one another and call for help. By the time the cops arrived, Honey was lying on her side, unresponsive. She was declared lifeless on the scene. The 2 friends were standing outside of the complex. As horrifyingly realistic as this sounds, there were a few inconsistencies in this theory. For starters, there wasn't really anything missing from the apartment. If this was a robbery gone wrong, you'd think the men would leave with a bunch of nice things, but the only thing missing was Honey's phone, and it was later found on the ground about a half a mile away. the motive also didn't add up either. If Honey tried to run away after stumbling upon the robbers, who's to say they couldn't just run away themselves? Yeah, it seems like Honey was quick to run away, and the guys were all wearing masks, so they'd be hard to identify if she tried to report the incident. And if these men didn't know Honey at all, why would they execute her in such an awful way? You'd think they might just threaten her to stay quiet about the robbery or something, not fire at her and shove her in a closet. But the cops insisted Honey's demise was the result of a robbery. They said Honey was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Even though no known items were stolen from the apartment, officials think this was a substance and/or money-related robbery. And I can kind of see that. Like, the two friends probably wouldn't want to admit they had illegal goodies to avoid getting in trouble themselves. Flora, on the other hand, wasn't buying any of this BS. She knew this was a planned crime. Flora recalled how off Honey seemed when she left that night. It was almost as if she didn't want to go out, but she was lured there by someone. So that's the theory she started to develop, that Honey was lured out to the complex that night to be slain. Here are the many reasons Flora and Cassandra both believe in this theory. 1. Why would Honey decide to leave the house if she was so tired? Yeah, she was a teenager who loved hanging out with friends, but I don't know how many people would want to go rage after working a long shift at a retail job. 2. Before Honey left that night, she said, "Mom, I really love you," which makes it seem like she knew something bad was gonna happen. 3. Flora and Cassandra don't think Honey would willingly go into an apartment where the door was kicked in. 4. Stone Mountain was a pretty small town where everyone pretty much knew everyone. It would be extremely unusual for this crime to be carried out by a bunch of randos. Whoever orchestrated the stunt had to have known Honey and wanted her gone. But then that poses another question. Why? Cassandra believes her sister was targeted for possibly knowing information that the assailants didn't want her to. If that's the case, maybe Honey did something that made them think she would rat them out. Or maybe the perps were just scared in general, so they decided to silence her for good. The sister also posed the idea that the perps could have lured Honey out in an attempt to warn or threaten her without taking her life. Cassandra said Honey was sweet, but had a bit of an attitude too. She thought Honey could have backtalked the attacker or attackers and angered them to the point of pulling the trigger. If someone said, "I'll shoot you," Cassandra said Honey would say something back like, "Do it then." As time passed, investigators continued to interview people, review the evidence, and try to theorize possible suspects. But there were no solid leads. Honey's family believes the two friends at the apartment might know more than they let on. Heck, they could even be responsible for the whole thing. And not much is known about these two individuals other than the fact that one of the friends is a guy and the other is a girl. But now that I think about it, it does seem a little strange that the whole time the robbers were in the apartment, the two friends didn't try to untie themselves or call for help. They were probably scared out of their minds if it really was a robbery gone wrong, but I do find it interesting that they were able to untie themselves pretty quickly after the perps allegedly left. Also, how did no one else see these 3 to 6 men around the complex or the area in general? And then when the cops pulled up, the two friends were already outside. While the investigation was ongoing, people were all over social media to share their sadness and anger over Honey's passing. A Facebook page was created titled RIP Honey, which now has over 130,000 members. Later, Honey's case was featured on an episode of the Dr. Oz show. In 2016, the local police received information about a weapon that was potentially the one used on Honey. It was sent off to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation for testing, but the results haven't been released to the public. Either way, it was clear that detectives were able to find some incriminating evidence because at 4:30 on Friday, April 3rd of 2020, an arrest was made. A 34-year-old man named Donald Ash was tracked down at his mom's house where he was put in cuffs and charged with second-degree homicide as well as concealing facts and false statements in the investigation. According to the assistant district attorney, Donald confessed to 2 different people that he was the one who snuffed Honey. Now, most sources don't say what role Donald played in the crime regarding the various theories out there. According to a reporter from True Crime Daily, Donald is apparently one of the 2 friends who claimed to have been tied up in the bathroom, which means the group robbery theory is fake. The lead detective in the case said they've spent hours upon hours looking into each and every detail and person in this case. After the thorough investigation and examination of evidence by the crime lab at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the detective reported the whole force's confidence in making the arrest. He then said, "We do believe that multiple people are responsible for this crime, and the investigation is ongoing. We hope more arrests will follow." When Flora was informed of the arrest, she was relieved, frustrated, and probably experienced every other emotion under the sun. She said she had been telling the detectives to look into Donald for years. He and Honey were acquaintances, but the dude was suspicious enough for Flora to throw his name out there to the cops. After the arrest, Flora said, "He's been out there in the streets, having fun, living his life. I want to know how it's possible to live with yourself after doing something like that. How can you get up every day and look in the mirror and think you're an okay person?" She then wrote in a Facebook post, "You still have time to do the right thing and speak up. I'm just saying it would make you feel better and help get all those involved arrested." Well, as much as it seemed like justice would finally be served, or at least to one person, things started to fall apart. After the initial arrest, Donald had 4 bond hearings. In April of 2020, he was first arraigned and no bond was granted by the judge. At another hearing, the judge set a bond for Donald under the condition that he remain under house arrest. By the 4th and final hearing, the judge said Donald would still be under house arrest, but not all the time. He would be able to be away from his home for up to 12 hours a day as long as he wore an ankle monitor. With that, Donald's bond was set at $80,000 under the conditions that he wears an ankle monitor and stays at home unless he needed to visit his attorney, go to a doctor, or for any religious purposes. On August 16th, Donald was released from prison after he posted his bond. As of now, no more advances have been made in Donald's trial date, and no more arrests have been made, even though the investigators were feeling all confident that they were going to clock more people for being involved. In April of 2021, Flora took to the RIP Honey Facebook page to say, "It has been a full year since someone was arrested in Honey's murder. Still no answers. Why in the world would someone take her life?" The court system did allow him to get 4 bond hearings. He is running the streets with no restrictions. Still can remain silent as to what happened that night. "I miss my daughter." This system really don't help victims' families at all. Judges allow the victim to be victimized all over. As horrible as this situation is, Flora isn't the only parent going through it. In the comments of that post, a woman named Shawn Miller shared her story, expressing the same grievances and heartbreak. Shawn's 17-year-old son, Dimitri Weaver, was found lying on the side of the road in Beaufort, South Carolina. He had a single bullet wound on his torso and was rushed to the hospital for medical attention. Sadly, doctors weren't able to save him and he passed away at the hospital. According to Shawn's Facebook comment, the detectives were able to figure out who was responsible for slaying Dimitri. It was a girl who was apparently in a car with Dimitri that night, and although she didn't straight up confess to pulling the trigger, all signs pointed that way. The girl was arrested, but she could only be charged for armed robbery due to the lack of incriminating evidence. She was granted a bond, just like Donald, and got released from prison. As of now, the woman is still walking free and has yet to be convicted for her involvement in the crime. Shawn expressed her frustration as she felt wronged by the criminal justice system. She reached out to Flora and said that there are many other mothers that she knows of who are experiencing similar pain. It's not clear how much interaction Flora and Shawn had with one another in private, but I hope they've been able to find a sense of comfort and support through their loss. Flora continues to share posts about Honey on Facebook, as well as give updates about the legal proceedings. The grieving mother once said in an interview, "If I could have anything, I'd want to see what she would have become." She never got to have her firsts. Her first car, house, baby, they all got stolen from her. Sadly, 2 of Honey's close friends have also lost their lives in a similar manner. It's too often that we hear stories about the wrong people getting their hands on dangerous weapons and acting out of rage. I hope Honey's story reaches far and wide so people understand the deep consequences of those scenarios. Honey should still be alive today, and because some sick person fired a bullet at her, her family and friends are left with the what ifs.